Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about two very important stories. One is about the situation in Afghanistan. As we all know that the United States has killed Al-Qaeda's leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in a drone strike. This was stated by none other than the President of the United States of America, Mr. Joe Biden, while he was delivering a speech in the White House on Monday. Now this character was the chief of Al-Qaeda, 71 years old, and a precision airstrike was ordered by the American president and he was eliminated. Now this seems to be a great, I would say, victory for the Americans, because they claim that without having a single boot on ground, they've been able to eliminate the chief of Al-Qaeda. The second story is again a very important and perhaps a very tragic story, and that is about the helicopter crash in which 6 precious lives were lost, including those of 5 officers and an NCO. The Corps Commander, 12th Corps, which is also called the Southern Command, General Sarfraz Alvi, was martyred, along with the currently serving DG Coast Guards brigadier, who was also in fact elevated to the level of a 2-star general recently, a few days ago. And another brigadier from the Engineers Corps was also martyred, along with 2 pilots. Both were majors from the Army Aviation, and the chief tech officer of the helicopter was also killed. So this was something very tragic, because they were there on a flood relief mission and they were looking after the damages that have occurred because of the heavy floods and rains in Balochistan. They were on their duty, they were in uniform, and they all embraced Shahadat. And we'll be talking about that also in our second part of the program. But let me quickly introduce you now to our panelists. We have with us in our studio on my right is Shaukat Paracha, who's a senior journalist, senior anchor person. Thank you very much, Paracha, for your time. And on Skype from London, UK, we have with us Sami Hamdi, the MD of the International Interest. Thank you very much, Hamdi, for your time for PTV World. And on telephone, we'll be having Brigadier Retired Mahmood Shah Saab, who's a senior analyst, and he's also going to join us shortly. But let's start off from this very important story, sir. It was all over CNN, all over the Western media, that the United States have killed Ayman al-Zawahiri in a drone strike, and that also in Kabul. And they believe that without having a single boot on ground, we've been able to achieve a big milestone, because perhaps the reason they gave after the 9/11 was to eliminate the Al-Qaeda network. Yes, Osama bin Laden was also eliminated around 11 years ago, if you remember. It was 2nd of May 2011. Right after 11 years, another big story is right in front of us. Now, sir, the drone strike, obviously this man was under observation, but the Americans still believe that he was having some sort of support from none other than the Taliban. Now, if that is the case, sir, were the Taliban hiding him? They all knew about the repercussions of what happened to Afghanistan post 9/11, because again they were harboring the Al-Qaeda chief then, and later on he was eliminated. But what I'm saying is, sir, that this clearly tells us that Afghanistan still has the potential to keep these people inside Afghanistan, to look after them and hide them perhaps. And at the same time, if this is true that the Taliban already knew that this man was in Kabul, obviously then there seems to be some sort of a connection between these various factions. Your take, sir.
Thank you very much. You raised many questions, and every aspect of your question is very important. Number one, yes, the Americans must rejoice that they have achieved another landmark. But from Pakistan's perspective, I must say, thanks God, Zawahiri was found and killed in Afghanistan, not in Pakistan.
Correct.
Because the bitterness between the two countries in the OBL operation in Abbottabad, it still carries on bitterness between the two countries. And killing of Zawahiri in Afghanistan also means that the allegations of his presence in Pakistan they were baseless and they were unwarranted, you see. Something gets very clear. Second aspect, what you are saying is, if Taliban knew now, since he was in Kabul, Taliban, they have come back after almost 20 years, 21 years. So, Zawahiri being in Afghanistan and in the compound in Kabul, for the last 21 years, Taliban were not in charge in Kabul. There was other governments, government of former President Hamid Karzai and Dr. Ashraf Ghani. And the Afghan intelligence, that was not run by Taliban. Afghan Interior Ministry was not run by Taliban. So, the bigger question is, if Zawahiri survived in Kabul during the presence of mighty forces of the United States of America, ISAF, you know, how could they were unaware of his presence in Afghanistan? Thirdly, if Zawahiri was not in Kabul and he was in the countryside inside Afghanistan, you can say in Kandahar, you can say in Spin Baldig, you can say in Nuristan, you can say in Kunnad, Paktia, anywhere, you know. But such a high valued target that must have been spotted or under surveillance, you know. And now that the other question is, now when Al-Zawahiri was you know, found and killed, so his movement, for example, or the structure of the house, or the house under observation or surveillance, it must have been done systematically. So, who on the ground in Kabul was cooperating and identifying this moving object if Zawahiri was moving, you know. So, that means
They say that he was killed in the downtown while he was visiting his family.
that's what I am saying.
Yes.
So, if he was visiting his family, someone was monitoring his movement, for example, you know. Someone knew that this house is owned by, you know. So, who are the Shkil Afridis over there in Kabul? It means the structure is still there, you know. There are people who are in touch with
The pro-American ideology.
You understand. Thirdly, you know, an important event also took place 3-4 days back. In Uzbekistan, Mullah Amir Khan Muttaqi and the US Special Representative Ambassador Thomas West, they had a meeting. And they met on the sideline of Conference on Afghanistan and then SCO, you know, because Mullah Amir Muttaqi attended both the events, you see. And then suddenly the American delegation also talked about unfreezing some of the amounts, you know, $3-4 billion of the Afghan assets that are frozen inside the United States in the US banks. Whether it's a quid pro quo, why the Americans were eager to give that much concession, but however, after this killing and when it was found that Al-Zawahiri was killed, Zabiullah Mujahid, the official spokesman of Taliban, he had termed it as a violation of sovereignty of Afghanistan. So, this is a big question. The question that why the American, they were eager to unfreeze or they agreed to look into unfreezing some of the amount of Afghan assets that is in the American banks, you know. Another aspect is very important. Taliban, in the Doha agreement, they agreed to cooperate in counterterrorism. That agreement is known to everyone, you know, that Taliban, there were 4 points, 4 things that were negotiated between Afghan Taliban and the US. That was ceasefire, Taliban never agreed, you know. The other was sitting across the table with the then Afghan government led by Dr. Ashraf Ghani, Taliban never agreed, you know. Then another, you know, was kind of broad based government, you know, Taliban were not very eager. The only point that Taliban agreed was that they will never allow their soil to be used against any other country. You remember. Qaeda chief sitting in Kabul means there was, if he was not exporting terror at that time, there is a potential, because Qaeda is meant for export of terror, know. So when Taliban made a pledge that they will never allow Afghan soil to be used against any other country, though many times Afghan soil has been used against Pakistan by TTP and their affiliates. So whether the Taliban obliged or they fulfilled this obligation, if there is any
connection,
I'm putting a lot of ifs and buts, because since I'm sitting here, but I'm analyzing the situation. Lastly, before you go to other worthy guests, I remember Christian Amanpur had an interview with Sirajuddin Haqqani Sahab, since they are in charge of the security. Sirajuddin Haqqani Sahab said that we do not look at the United States an enemy now. So what will be the aftermath of this drone strike now, whether Afghan Taliban still feel so or they have some other policy toward United States? So these are many things that come to my mind after this episode.
Very interesting analysis, Paracha Sahab. Now let's also hear what Sami Hamdi has to share with us. Now, one thing is very clear that if it is true, Mr. Hamdi, that the Taliban leadership knew about this particular attack, or perhaps they were a part and parcel of this particular episode, where they could have informed about the location of Ahmad al-Zawahiri. Now, case number one, if that is the situation, then there could be certain factions which are pro, there are certain which are anti, and there could be a conflict within their own ranks, number one. And secondly, sir, the Americans in CNN, I was listening to a lot of analysts, their former head of security as well, and they all said that, you never know that another 9/11 could be in planning. So your take, sir.
Thank you for having me. I think first and foremost what's important to highlight is that Al-Qaeda have not exactly been operational in the manner that they have been in the past, and that instead we've seen ISIS emerge, ISIS compete with Al-Qaeda, we've seen ISIS essentially try to expand and even compete with Al-Qaeda with regards to trying to recruiting soldiers and recruiting leaders. Ayman al-Zawahiri has not been as prominent as he has been in the past, particularly since the death of Osama bin Laden himself. The second point that's worth noting is that Ayman al-Zawahiri himself did far more damage to Islam, him and Osama bin Laden, than anybody else before them, and essentially they helped to facilitate this war on terror. They gave the climate, the environment that allowed Bush to then exert American power to punish a region that was already beginning to drift away from the Americans. The reason why I mention this is that it's important to highlight that when you look at the story of the Taliban, the reality is that Al-Qaeda is the organization that ruined Taliban's rule in Afghanistan, in that it gave a reason for the US to suddenly intervene in Afghanistan, to invade Afghanistan, and then subsequently colonize Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda was the raison d'etre. It was the reason through which America was able to enter Afghanistan. The reason why I mention this is that it appears this time that if we follow the scenario that you've presented in your question, it may well be that this time the Taliban are no longer willing to play games with regards to the security of their rule. They know they're under significant pressure. They know the US is not allowing financial aid. They know that they haven't secured international recognition. They're struggling in their relations with Turkey and Qatar. They're struggling in their relations with Pakistan. They're struggling in their relations with essentially all of the powers. And despite Russia and India showing interest in the beginning, that interest appears to be cooling. It may well be that the Taliban this time are essentially not playing games anymore. And this is why it may well be that while Ayman al-Zawahiri was found in Kabul, it may well be the Taliban themselves had a role in helping the Americans identify where he was. And perhaps if they didn't cooperate, they at least perhaps turned a blind eye to American intentions in terms of going after Ayman al-Zawahiri. The idea being to give Biden this gift in exchange for some sort of cooperation and international recognition that the Taliban so badly seek. But it's also important to highlight another dynamic, which is that as the Americans are stating that they can still target people on their wanted list without having boots on the ground, this is significant. The idea that the US still has this shoot and kill policy without judicial review, without judicial process, without trying to bring these criminals to trial, without trying to deliver a fair trial, without abiding by the laws of war, human rights. There is still this cowboy approach with regards to America, targeting individuals who perhaps are not as much as a threat as they were before, as in the case of Ayman al-Zawahiri. So I think that when it comes down to it, the reality is that this may well benefit the Taliban as opposed to cause problems for them, in that while people may accuse the Taliban of still harboring the likes of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the reality is that the popular perception, whether it's true or not, the popular perception is that perhaps the Taliban did turn a blind eye to it, that they are willing to work with the US on counter-terrorism issues, that they're not willing to allow Afghanistan to be a hotbed for terrorism again, and the Taliban perhaps are looking at Al-Qaeda and saying, look, Al-Qaeda ruined it for us last time, we won't allow room for them to ruin it for us this time. And Ayman al-Zawahiri himself may well be that, we say in Arabic, kabsh fida, the scapegoat, the offering to the US in exchange for perhaps some leniency that the Taliban are looking for as they continue to try
but having said that, Sami, Hamdi, the Americans also mentioned that senior Haqqani figures were aware of Zawahiri's presence in the area, and the official also mentioned that it was a clear violation of the Doha Agreement, and they say that even took steps to conceal his presence after Sunday's successful strike. Now, the strike took place on the 31st. Interestingly, 2 Hellfire missiles were fired. They say that he was targeted, and there were casualties also in that particular strike. There were other people also killed, but not his family. So his family was perhaps, including his daughter and his children, who were initially, or rather intentionally, they were not targeted during the strike, and they remained unharmed. What's your take on that, sir?
I think what's important to highlight is that the Taliban have a fine line to navigate with regards to what is unfolding with regards to Ayman al-Zawahiri. The reality is that there remains, or there appears to be at least, some sort of sympathies towards Al-Qaeda. We remember how the Taliban refused to hand over Al-Qaeda before, when they were last in power, before the US invasion. We know that Al-Qaeda have a long history with the Taliban. They have a long history with Afghanistan itself. Their leaders, Osama bin Laden, having fought with the Afghans against the Soviet occupation. We do know perhaps that the Taliban it may well be that the Taliban are being very careful in terms of how their rank and file will react to this news. The Taliban don't want to be seen as being a party that is willing to hand over old friends, or willing to hand over those with which it has cooperated in the past. And this is why what we're seeing unfolding before us is a very grey picture, despite the statements that are being released. And I think it is significant that nobody, even those who sympathize with the Taliban, are entirely certain with regards to the statement or the truth of the statements that are being released by the Taliban or even by the US. And this is why when we look at it from a who gains and who wins perspective, the reality is the Taliban have a lot to gain from the extermination and elimination of Al-Qaeda officials in Afghanistan than actually harboring them and actually looking after them. And I think this is why when we look at Ayman al-Zawahiri's family, they weren't killed. When you look at how it appears to be a precision strike, when you look at how it's come on the back of a sort of signs of perhaps a thaw in the relationship between the US and Taliban, or if not a thaw, at least some sort of progress with regards to the relationship between the Americans and the Taliban. I think that the reality is that this situation poses more questions than answers, and it poses more difficult questions, particularly for the Taliban, in terms of the internal debate as to whether the Taliban handed over Ayman al-Zawahiri, or whether the Americans sought to provoke the Taliban by actually conducting a drone strike. And the reality reality is, I think many would lean towards the former, that the Taliban perhaps did come up with some sort of deal with the Americans. Again, there's no necessary proof of it, but sometimes perception is stronger than the truth. And I think the Taliban now would be looking to handle the fallout from the assassination of Ayman al-Zawahiri. But perhaps the Taliban will not necessarily be too sad to see Ayman al-Zawahiri go, given the extent of the trouble that Al-Qaeda's presence has brought, not only for the Taliban, but also for the Muslim world.
All right. Now, coming to you, Paracha Saab, there are a couple of questions here. Now, I was watching RT last night. Obviously, they have a different version. When you switch on the Western channels, they have a very different approach. Now, the RT was blaming the Kosovo conflict because they said that the Americans want that there should be another opening, you know, for them to intervene. So Kosovo is the issue. Ukraine, we all know about. The visit of Ms. Pelosi to Taiwan is something which the Chinese have really objected on. And well, even if she's there for an hour or two or a day or whatever she plans to,
you know.
it's symbolic, and
Yeah.
they have given the message. Do you think now, because the American president really emphasized on this fact that, well, you never know, there could be another 9/11 in planning. And he also mentioned that since we have killed and eliminated, but we'll also make sure that there should be no threat for the Americans anywhere. And if there is, we will go after them. What is that supposed to mean, sir? Do you think they want to open up another front somewhere around this region, sir? Or these drone strikes will continue to happen?
Number one, any other 9/11, 9/11 took place once, and then, you know, the American strategy, not only all across the world, but within the United States, they created another Department of Homeland Security, and at least they made sure that their population within the United States that is secure. And but despite many threats, you know, like that, no recurrence, thanks God, took place within the United States. So when someone says, even if President Biden says so, the threat of Al-Qaeda got over with the active participation of Pakistan. President Musharraf, former President General Pervez Musharraf, wrote in his book that more than 700 Al-Qaeda affiliates, they were handed over to the United States.
That's
and
correct.
many are still, you know, resting in the Guantanamo Bay,
Bay.
you know, some Pakistanis as well, you see. So the threat or the potential, you know, of causing any another 9/11, frankly, you know, does not exist at the moment, you know. Even, you know, IS threat, you know, from the Middle East, you know, they were also kicked off from over there. However, when Taliban got eager, Afghan Taliban got eager to negotiate with the United States, one perception about their readiness was that they also felt threatened from ISIS or now ISKP, you know, inside Afghanistan. And maybe, you know, Taliban, as Mr. Hamdi was also talking about, between the lines, some connivance from the Afghan Taliban. Since Al-Qaeda is no more a very powerful global entity that could cause.
But most of their leaders have been eliminated.
That's what
this
I'm
was
saying.
the only one, perhaps a known one. remaining.
Exactly, you know. Secondly, ISIS, their presence inside Afghanistan, and you remember MOB, mother of all bombs, was dropped by President
On the
Trump,
border
you
of
know,
Pakistan,
on the
Afghanistan.
border of Pakistan, on the sanctuaries of ISIS, you know. That threat is there. So Taliban, Afghan Taliban must be very conscious of their presence, ISIS presence in Afghanistan, and they must be having in their thoughts and minds how to counter it, how to counter the rising popularity of that organization, because Afghans believe in Afghans. They never believe in external forces, you know. Some people may think that they have the similar goals or similar destinies, but no, Afghans from their core of hearts, they are Afghans, and whether they are from the north or they are south, never ever you heard or I heard during the last 40 years that somebody have talked about partition of Afghanistan on the basis of Tajik Afghanistan, Uzbek Afghan, or Hazara
Pashtun or
Afghanistan,
Hazara, yeah.
Pashtun or Herat. No, whosoever
They are a
talked
single
about
unit.
exactly, whosoever talked about Afghanistan, they talked about a single entity. So Afghans are very conscious about being Afghans and any other entity being a foreign entity. So is the case with these elements. History will unfold or events may unfold that what exactly caused over there, but the concern now is that first we talked about one preposition, that if Taliban had some connivance, no, if Taliban have no connivance, as I was talking about the statement by Sirajuddin Haqqani that no more enmity with United States. What if that Taliban had never had an iota of connivance, and they think, as Zabiullah Mujahid stated, that it's the violation of Afghan sovereignty. So what will be the reaction from Afghanistan? Would they revive their old, revengeful acts, for example?
They have this condemnation from the Afghan government. They have strongly condemned this drone strike.
The condemnation, on the face of it, everyone does, as in Pakistan there was always a condemnation. But since we are talking about some kind of connivance, if there is no connivance, and is there anything beyond the condemnation? That is what I am saying. And whether they will resume attacks against the US interests, not installation which are no more there inside Afghanistan, but interests are there, as you are talking about,
Absolutely,
So
sir.
Kosovo, China, and then are the regional powers. You talked about RT, but today Russians must be alert, Central Asians must be alert today, because the direct repercussions of anything happening inside Afghanistan
would be around Afghanistan.
Exactly.
Now, sir, let's take this very important point to Brigadier retired Mahmood Shah Sahab. He's just joined us. Assalamu alaikum, Brigadier Sahab.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Good to have you in the show, sir, and thank you very much for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. Now, Brigadier Sahab, let's share your views regarding this drone strike in which 2 Hellfire missiles were used and Ayman al-Zawahiri was eliminated.
Yes.
Do you think this could have been possible with or without the consent of the Taliban? Your take, sir.
I think Taliban, like the Pakistani government, probably would not know. I think it's been some sort of intelligence collection by the Americans or the American agents in Afghanistan, which might have made it possible to strike at Ayman al-Zawahiri, because they were looking for him. And I think in things like this, like in case of Osama bin Laden, we were helpless, as they had reached him and they were thinking of striking him. So a similar thing has happened in Afghanistan. And of course, the cohesion of forces within Afghanistan is much lesser than what Pakistan has, a regular army and things like this. So it has been made possible. I think it is also like turning a page over. The Al-Qaeda took birth in Afghanistan. They were all foreign elements. They were mostly Middle Eastern elements who came to Afghanistan. And then they had a plan of their own. And that plan was injurious to Afghanistan or even Pakistan and Central Asian republics. So they had their aims and objectives. And throughout this sort of campaigns by the Americans, the only thing they have achieved positively is they have eliminated Al-Qaeda. They could not do anything against the Taliban or any other entities which are in Afghanistan, but they were able to wipe out Taliban in a major operation, mostly conducted through drone strikes. And after Afghanistan was attacked by the American and the other forces, the rank and file of Al Qaeda had exfiltrated Afghanistan. They went away to wherever they came from, but the leadership remained there.
All right. Now, bring this up. There's another important point. Do you think? Let's assume for a moment that the Taliban, or maybe a faction of Taliban, or perhaps the senior leadership of Taliban knew about this particular drone strike, but obviously the Americans said that it was a surprise for everybody because we never told the Afghan government, and you know, forget about the permission also. Now, what I'm saying is, sir, that do you think this is going to become a regular phenomena? Because they have claimed that they have been able to kill number one of Al Qaeda after bin Laden. And obviously, this man was from Egypt and he had different understanding. And if he was freely roaming around that also in the downtown of Kabul, it is not practically possible, sir. The Taliban, I mean, they have their own pickets and checkpoints and everything. And perhaps this man had a known face. Now, the point comes that do you think this is going to either affect Pakistan or the, I would let me put it this way, or the bordering area, perhaps that is also very important. And you never know, there could be strikes in the region. Second important factor, sir, and that is, again, do you think that there would be division within the ranks of the Taliban, or perhaps a civil war like situation can develop? Because at the end of the day, Al Qaeda, even if they have 200, 2,000 or 20,000 fighters, God knows what the number is, but at least they have, if this man was there, they have this presence. This could lead to an internal conflict, or not an absolute civil war like situation, but you know, attacks on the Taliban and so on and so forth. Bring this up.
I think it will be reading too much into this situation. I don't think Al Qaeda is something of the past now. I think this is the last known figure, Ayman al-Zawahiri of Al Qaeda, who was existing without any practical shape of Al Qaeda now. And I think this number is too high, the 20,000 or 10,000. I think Al Qaeda has been finished now. And by striking down this figurehead who had no effectiveness now left, because it was a two-way traffic. Osama bin Laden was receiving a lot of funds from the Middle East in the name of Islam. This was not the case for Ayman al-Zawahiri. He was mostly known as a criminal from Anwar al-Sadat era in Egypt. So he was on the run, and finally he has been pinned down, and I think Al-Qaeda mostly should be considered as null and void. For the remaining, even it wouldn't make any difference, and they would be in a manner, except for the prestige point of view of the Taliban government, they would say good riddance, this Ayman al-Zawahiri. Because they gave many guarantees to the Americans in Doha, sort of agreement that they have had, that we will not give sort of shelter to any foreign elements within Afghanistan. And Al-Qaeda was one such element of one such thing in the minds of Americans when they were insisting on these things. So I think it should be considered as a closed chapter as far as Al-Qaeda is concerned. And I think it is no more there, and one person being struck like that in Afghanistan, well, they don't have very good grip over the Afghan territory. Example is the TTP operating from Afghan soil, and BLAs and so many other things operating from Afghan soil towards us, and also in the north. Sometimes they operate into Central Asia. Because
All right.
they don't have very firm grip over the law and order within Afghanistan.
All right. Now, Sami Hamdi, a quick comment on when you look at the history of Ayman al-Zawahiri. Doctor was from Egypt, supported the Islamic movement there. He was somebody who totally opposed what Anwar Sadat did. If you remember, Anwar Sadat accepted Israel, and he was very happy when Anwar Sadat was eliminated or killed during that parade, if you remember. So this man had a very, very clear ideology, pro-Islam, and then he says that he met the Al-Qaeda chief then, Osama bin Laden, and they had this common agenda. And then he also hailed and said that those brothers, those 19 brothers, the hijackers I'm talking about, he really appreciated their effort and said, anything that can destroy America, whether the military or the civilians, is a compulsion for every Muslim. I mean, these kind of statements, when you issue. Now, this man is no more. But, sir, the ideology hasn't finished yet. You killed Osama bin Laden, Zawahiri became the chief. You have killed Zawahiri, there is going to be another replacement. Now, you can't eliminate each and every single individual, so that is also a reality. Now, let's suppose the Afghan government ends up receiving a certain sum. It could be a token money of, let's say, $1 billion, $2 billion, or $3 billion, their own money, which is deposited in the United States of America. What sort of a message the non-Taliban factions inside Afghanistan will get, like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any other splinter group who has this kind of a philosophy and ideology which Zawahiri used to follow?
I think that first and foremost it's important to highlight that Zawahiri was a product of his time, and times have changed since Al-Qaeda emerged. I think the reality is that Al-Qaeda emerged from a period of significant strife and war, whether that's Afghanistan's resistance against the Soviet occupation, whether that's regards to the Gulf War, whether it's regards to what was unfolding in Bosnia when so many people, Mujahideen, were going to fight in Bosnia, in Afghanistan, in these other different areas. Osama bin Laden, Ayman Zawahiri were involved in some of these issues, and they came to their worldview was molded by the gun, it was molded by the bullets, it was molded by warfare, grenades and the like, and they took that into their interpretation of Islam, in which they defied the commands of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he told his companions in the Battle of Badr that you may not kill innocents, you may not cut down trees, you may not. He gave all these laws of war that Al-Qaeda defied, that Al-Qaeda went against, and that Al-Qaeda totally distorted the meaning of Islam to deliver the greatest damage to the image of Islam, more damage than any
very,
enemy
very
could
rightly said.
Outside of Islam. With regards to the message being sent with the Americans, if they give some sort of sum to the Taliban afterwards, I think it's important to stress that the ideology of Al-Qaeda and ISIS is no longer as attractive even to extremists as it once was. Al-Qaeda is a fraction of the force that it once was, while ISIS is having its leader taken out and is struggling to sort of regain any sort of momentum such as that which we saw in Iraq. They're now a disparate movement. The idea exists not necessarily amongst the ideologues, but the idea exists for mainly nation states to use as an excuse to expand in Syria, or an excuse to expand in Afghanistan, or an excuse to expand in Iraq. In other words, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are on their last legs, but what keeps them alive is not ideologues. What keeps them alive is the political utility of powers that seek to stay in Iraq or seek to stay in Syria. So the direct answer to your question is Osama bin Laden has been killed, Ayman al-Zawahiri has been killed, but I do think also the ideology is dying as it becomes abundantly apparent that the majority of Muslims who, when they saw 9/11, said this is clearly wrong, we don't kill civilians, we only go after those who oppress us and who are aggressive.
I totally agree, and I think because of people like him, this concept of Islamophobia came out. And unfortunately, during the last 20-21 years, the way the image of the Muslim has been distorted or changed. I mean, that is something to think about. But now, a quick comment from you, Brigadier Saab, that is about this very, very tragic incident in which precious lives were lost when we heard that a helicopter has crashed. Last night they were reporting that it went missing. Today we confirmed that the Corps Commander, 12th Corps Southern Command, Lieutenant General Sarfraz Ali, embraced Shahadat along with another brigadier who was promoted as a Major General, the Coast Guard's head, and then one of the brigadier from the Engineers Corps was there as well. Two pilots, both from Army Aviation, both majors, young guys, and the Chief Tech. They all embraced Shahadat in that incident. Your take on this very, very important issue, sir?
Yes, I think it is very, very sad incident and in fact a great loss. A great loss in the sense that we have had for quite some time not the rank of Lieutenant General, that is the Corps Commander, dying in battle for quite some time. We had one incident and when the terrorists attacked the Surgeon General in Pindi, but that was a terrorist activity, whereas through normal functioning, through helicopter crash, we have lost a very senior officer. And I think this should be historical, a Lieutenant General, that is the Corps Commander.
A very competitive general also, sir.
Very competitive and
he has remained the DGMI. He has also commanded the 111 Brigade. Yep.
Yes, and I have the honor of having met him number of times. A very sober and sincere man. May Allah rest his soul. Along with other senior officers, a Major General, a Brute, and a Brigadier, and then the two pilots, young majors.
Yes.
This is a great loss. But it happened through climate.
But sir, in fact, they were on duty and they were in uniform and they were basically on the flood relief mission. So that was a mission.
Yes.
May Allah accept their sacrifice. Sir, your take on the same point.
Yes. May Allah rest.
These are not the 6 officers or soldiers that we have lost. Trust me, it's an asset that we have lost.
Yes.
Especially in the person of Shaheed Corps Commander Sarfraz Ali. He was defense attaché, mean a diplomat.
Yes, sir.
He was instructor in Command and Staff College,
College,
Quetta, mean a teacher. He served as head of military intelligence, it mean a top spy for Pakistan.
Smart, intelligent man.
111 Brigade Commander, so he was the implementing arm, you know. IGFC
also,
South,
yes.
you know, mean all operations, all ground operation whatsoever, you know, he had it. So how much was in one person? And we lost it, you know. And how, it's very important to understand now. He was serving his people now. He went to see or review the plight of those who lost their houses in the floods, who lost their shelter in the flood, who
lost their livelihood.
Who the people who had nothing to eat, for example, because they lost livelihood, everything, you know. So
the cattle and everything.
So a duty of a soldier, but in the form of for the duty of humanity, you know. He was there to serve.
To serve and to protect.
Exactly.
Whether on the border or inside.
Exactly.
The
and then, you know, twice Sitara Basalat, and especially the DG Coast Guard, for example, a Brigadier Khalid Shaheed from Engineering Corps, who was basically there to look at the roads where the
damages and how to look after the
and then the bridges where it has been done. So all were doing duty for the people of Balochistan, and that is something
very, very hard.
Very hard to talk about, you know, what happened with them. But as we all pray that Almighty Allah rest them in peace, and their families are granted patience, you know, they are bestowed patience, because everyone was married, 2 sons, 1 daughter,
young
2 sons,
also,
you know,
exactly.
they had little kids, and especially the young majors, you know. So it's not easy to talk about them, you see.
Very, very tragic.
Yeah.
But Parag Sahab, thank you very much, sir, for your presence in the
pleasure,
program. Brigadier Sahab, it was a pleasure having you, sir. Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank Mr. Hamdi for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. It was a pleasure. And that's all we have for this hour. Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow at 8 or 5 p.m. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.